thank you all for having me. Wow, I'm super chilled, so excited to be here opening up BADCamp for you all. And I have a talk for you about feelings into features. I'm going to talk to you about UX and why it's an innovation catalyst for Drupal. Am I loud enough? Can everyone hear me? Are we all good? Okay, cool. So, as Luke and John said, I have various roles about me. I'm Emma Horrell, first of all. And I have 4 roles that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm the UX manager for Drupal core. I'm UX research lead for Drupal CMS. And my day job, what I do for a living, is I work for the University of Edinburgh, head up a UX service back in Scotland. And I also run a community of practice for folks like me working in higher ed in UX back in the UK so that we can collab. And really the bottom 2 roles on that list have prepared me for the Drupal roles. So hopefully you'll, through the course of my talk, you realise I'm in a good place to be leading UX in Drupal, which is completely exciting for me. So before we get into it, I'm going to talk about what UX is, right? And UX has an official definition. The International Standards Organization define it as a person's perceptions and responses that result from the use or anticipated use of a product, system, or service. And I'm really grateful this definition is here, but boy, it doesn't really sum up what UX is all about for me. It doesn't sum up how vibrant UX is, how changeable it is, the potential of UX, how much opportunity there is by doing UX work. So when I talk about UX, I talk about it like doing UX. It's an active thing, and it's everything you can do to make a person's experience of using a product, system, or service as good as it can be in a given context. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That is my motivation, my goal, because it's such an opportunity to make a person's life a little bit better by improving the experience of something they're using. So while I might have pictures of me doing talks like this at Drupal events, which I absolutely love doing, my day-to-day looks more like this. I'm sat in Scotland with my headphones on, and it's cold in Scotland, right? So I get to buy lots of jumpers and knitwear, which I love. But my day-to-day involves watching people interact with technology, right? Listening to what they're saying, listening to their thought processes, trying to second-guess where they're going to click next, watching videos back and then taking screenshots to work out what they did, why they did it, and then testing it and trying different things and seeing how they react. And there's always more UX that can be done in the world than there are UX professionals like me. So one of the things I love doing, apart from buying jumpers, is coaching other people to do it. Coaching people to just incorporate a little bit of UX into their day-to-day, because a little bit of UX really does go a long way. So, into slide 6, and I've not mentioned Drupal yet. Okay, here we go. Here is my introduction into Drupal, and I like to think of, I'm on a constant learning curve with Drupal, which is another thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. So when I talk about my journey with Drupal, if you like, I like to think about it as a competence on the bottom and then confidence on the other axis. So I first was introduced to Drupal in my job at the University of Edinburgh. We moved from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. So I learned a lot about paragraphs. I spent many hours watching people use paragraphs, and I got to know this. And confidence was going up, and I was like, right, yeah, okay, I've got this. And then I got interested in the community, right? And everybody is so friendly, and you can ask so many questions. And then you get into lots of different Slack groups, and we know how it goes. And one of those Slack groups was Promote Drupal, and we worked on the Drupal.org restructure. And then I started to realize, you know what, there's a lot more to this than I kind of thought. So the confidence kind of dipped. And then met Luke and others, and we started to look at terminology, the words in Drupal, and Drupalisms, and terms that mean something in Drupal that maybe don't mean the same elsewhere. And that's when I realized, okay, right, confidence going down a bit, but I was still motivated to learn more. Then came along Drupal CMS last year, and I had the amazing privilege of being involved with that from the beginning, signing the pledge up to Starshot, really bought into everything that Starshot, which became Drupal CMS, was about, and then confidence started to go up. And then this year it got even better, because I got asked to become, along with Christina Chimias, the UX manager for Drupal core, which is a huge responsibility and one that I'm still finding my feet in a couple of months in. And for me, I think like my reflection on Drupal and UX, and over the time, relatively short time I've been involved in the community, I think Drupal is going through an evolution in Drupal, and I actually think, listening to people, UX has happened in Drupal since forever, right? But it was maybe just not called UX, it was maybe just not labelled as that. But anybody in this community who builds something that somebody else is going to use, they're thinking about how that's going to get used. It's UX in its purest form. But there are a couple of milestones that have stood out for me through the time I've been involved, and one of which was the restructuring of Drupal.org. So that was a piece of work which was super user-centered because it involved looking at the Drupal website and thinking, what are people coming to this for? What do they need to find out? What content can we put here that's going to help them decide Drupal is the CMS for them? That led me on to that and various other things, getting involved with the admin UI restructure, led me on to looking at terminology and thinking that every word that's in a Drupal interface, it means something to somebody. It's an opportunity for them to make sense. And again, that kind of got me thinking about how we can open this up and thinking about like how people are perceiving Drupal. Drupal CMS had UX involved from the beginning, embedded in the beginning, because it was about reaching out to an unfamiliar audience, the non-technical audience. So we had to learn a lot about them. And most excitingly, the last year, for me, it kind of really signaled a sea change in Drupal with UX is the creation of these roles. So not just the role, the UX research lead role for Drupal CMS and the UX manager role for Drupal core, but also the creation of a contributor role, so that there's now a place for people who want to do UX come in and recognize that there is a place for them in the community. And I see that has been one of the most exciting changes within UX, within Drupal, because it signals kind of moving away from doing UX reactively in a tactical way to it being a more strategic and proactive objective. So what do I mean by tactical, proactive, reactive UX? Well, I think for most of us, when we encounter UX in Drupal, it happens at interfaces, right? We look at these all day, every day, and this is kind of where our user experiences of Drupal happen. And this is also where UX issues happen. So people will try and interact with an interface, they'll try and do something, and then they'll go, oh, this is a rubbish UX, I can't do it, I don't understand how to do it. And this is one example that I saw in a usability test. I watched somebody look at that set of fields and try and work out how to add an image, and they couldn't do it. So your instinct is to go, okay, let's change the interface. Let's make it super clear how you do this thing in the interface, and then we will make the UX better. Doesn't work quite like that because there's more to it. I would be out of a job otherwise, right? So there's more to it. And so I think like one of the things for me that helps with UX is instead of thinking I'm working towards a perfect interface that everybody can understand, is super intuitive, supports everyone's task, you're really working towards a state, a kind of an interacting state of lots of different factors feeding in. So you've got on the one level what the user is turning up to the interface with, their language, their ways of working, their expectations, and then that's supported by, yes, the user interface, but also the system structure, content model, naming conventions and such. And you can only control some of these factors. We can't control how people show up to the interfaces that we create in Drupal and the products and systems that we put in front of them. But we can control the bottom level. And this is why UX is a catalyst for innovation, because it involves thinking about things differently. It involves sometimes flipping things on its head. And therefore it can feel kind of disruptive by putting UX and user-centered experiences up front. Thinking about this another way is there's a place for this kind of UX, and this UX happens every day and it's very valued. And what happens is something will get built, and we have an amazing community worldwide of software engineers and developers, super talented, and they'll build something and they'll come to somebody like me and go, okay, I want to do some UX on this, I want to improve the user experience. And somebody like me will go, cool, okay, let me help you with that. Can you tell me who it's for? Can you tell me what it does? Can you tell me what good looks like? And these were a bunch of questions that the person who made the thing doesn't know the answer to a lot of the time, because they made it and they see there's potential, but they're not quite sure how to articulate that to help somebody like me design a test. And you end up with a kind of stalemate where somebody like me feels they don't do a good job, and the developer kind of feels frustrated that they didn't get to see if what they made really resonated. So a better way of working is for uncovering these user needs all the time, on the daily, just kind of clocking how people are using stuff and turning that into insights. And that can then spark, feeding that to the development community and working more closely aligned with them, can then spark the innovations. So those innovations are kind of rooted in the feelings from the beginning. Then the testing is easy because you knew what you were aiming for when the thing was made. And this takes time, right? This is not a kind of quick thing. But when you start achieving this, and this starts happening in different pockets of the community, I might have mentioned that I like drawing maps. There was one that I drew when I was making sense of what happens in the Drupalverse. It's not to scale and it's not accurate, and I like words too. But like so that user-centered innovation, when that starts to happen in the community, it has a ripple effect because things that have been rooted in feelings from the beginning actually start to resonate easier, that they get picked up easier. So you don't have to do the hard work of selling, I made a thing and here's what it does, because people are already kind of in tune to what was the goal in the first place and what was the user-centered need behind that. And you might think, well, okay, Emma, this all sounds cool, but how can we research everything? We can't research every possible thing someone can do in Drupal. Well, the good news is we have a bit of a head start on this, because over centuries, decades, people have been understanding how humans work. And while we can push technology to the absolute limits, there are certain things about human behavior that can help us design in a way to help our innovations, to help whatever we build, really stand out and get picked up and actually have the impact that we know that they can have. So I'm going to talk through a couple of these. So we as humans, we handle context and narrative much more easily than abstract concepts. If we can put something into a story that makes sense to us and our tasks and what we want to achieve, then it will stick in our brains. And we tend to think associatively, not linearly, so we'll make connections with things which don't necessarily sit together, but that we're using our brains to kind of pull associations together. That's related to pattern seeking. We like patterns, we use those to make sense of the world, and we get wedded to certain patterns, and then we kind of put new information into those patterns to make sense of how things work or how we think they should work. If we don't know the full story, our brains are super good at making it up, just like using what we know and kind of like, does this sort of align to what I think? I can pull this in here. And we do that because we want to conserve brain power. We want to work in a very economical fashion. We work well with others. So we're social, and this is something that we seek to do in whatever we do. So how can we use those insights? Well, on the one level, we can turn it into a basic playbook within Drupal, and we can think whatever we're building, think about the human traits in the background and turn that into a kind of a playbook. So we know that humans make stuff up as they go along. So let's make sure we build in a margin for error. Let's find a way so they can get the full details in an interface so that they're not trying to find this information. We know that people want to bring other people in, so we can build in stuff like roles and permissions and think about this is not going to just exist on one person's computer. We know that people forget what has to happen when, and if it doesn't kind of resonate with their narrative, then they'll forget a stage or not realize why a stage is important. So let's break down complex workflows into small steps and let's make them really realistic and so that they resonate with people. And focusing on the context and not the system, let's talk about things in ways that resonate with the tasks people are doing rather than the kind of system-formed terms. This is one way of applying these kind of human behavior insights to help us work and build stuff more innovatively. You can wrap this up, and this cycle, UX product design cycle, is a very simple cycle. It's useful to bear in mind because it starts with learning. It starts with learning about a particular area, whether that's taking one of those human traits and digging into it in a bit more detail in a context, use that to build, measure the thing, and then you keep going. And you can ramp up the learn part, and that's what's been happening in Drupal, and I'm going to share some examples of how that's been happening to really kind of spark some innovation. So I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that learning can happen and how it can drive innovation and how it's happening right now. I'm going to talk about current state learning with the example of Drupalisms. I'm going to talk about discovery learning with the example of Drupal CMS and iterative learning with the example of Drupal AI. So, current state learning is all about looking at how stuff happens now and using that as a kind of, right, how can things happen better in the future? Where's the opportunities to do things better? So that's why there's a can of worms here. My daughter drew the can of worms. It's one of my favourite icons, because it can feel like, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to look into terminology that's just going to open so many questions that we can't answer? True, but it can then help kind of find a way through and look at innovative pathways. I'm going to talk you through this. So with current state learning, applying this to Drupal's terminology, looking at Drupalism, the question, like the motivation behind this was thinking, well, what experience does Drupal's terminology provide for people who use it? And also thinking, for people new to Drupal, how does that land for them? And we got together, Luke mentioned the BOF that we had in Lille, and what that was about was kind of like sense checking, to sort of doing a litmus test. Is anybody else finding this? And each of us that came to that BOF, we all had a kind of story similar to this one, based on sentiment, but where we'd seen somebody try and do something in Drupal and get kind of stopped in their tracks from doing it. And mine, I was watching somebody at the university doing a usability test, putting content into paragraphs, and they came across this paragraph, which is a help paragraph, and they went, what? Because it kind of threw them off, and it was a shame, because it spoiled the experience to that point. And for me, that's where it resonated, and others attending that BOF had a similar experience. So we had a kind of force to do something about it. And we spent a lot of time in a lot of meetings, and I can't take all the credit for this. Ralph Kohler, Thomas Howell, Luke, and others were kind of involved in thinking, well, how do we even approach this? Should we even approach this? And we looked at different ways that exist out there, of kind of mechanisms of making sense of kind of complex situations, and we thought through 6 stages, an objective approach. So our plan, and this was formed in 2023, let's get an idea of the problem, let's collect the terms. If there is a problem, let's collect the terms in the Drupal admin UI, and let's start evaluating them. Let's have a look at how confusing people find them, how easy it is to define them. Let's use those kind of questions to work out how complex people are finding things. Is there anything we can kind of prioritise here? From that, we could decide which ones we include in the control vocabulary and which ones we would include in a words we don't say list. We would then produce translations. One of the strengths of Drupal is multilingual, so translations was kind of one of the motivating factors for looking at terminology in this way. And then we need to establish a process. We would recognise that we wouldn't be one and done with this. We need a process to maintain this vocabulary going forward. So how's it going? Like a year, 2 years later, really. So it turns out there's quite a lot of terms in the admin UI. Of course there is. But so we collected a lot of them, and this was really insightful. This taught us, okay, there are a lot of different words being used for the same things, and there are lots of words that are used for different things. And we're still going with that. We realised with that number of terms, we wanted to kind of think, okay, how can we start assessing the complexity? We have enough terms now to think, like, are there particular areas that are confusing in the community? So we made a community quiz, which I'll talk about in a sec, to kind of get a gauge on that. We haven't started on the controlled vocabulary, the words we don't say list, and the translations, that's the later piece. But we have started thinking, okay, when new terms come into Drupal, we need to kind of have a check on this to see, you know, if a new term's being used, is that another version of a term that's already there? So we've got an issue to start that. And this is a very baby steps situation, but we're kind of making inroads. So, a community quiz. We had 20 questions, and we did a lot of work with people in the community who were super, who worked in Drupal for years and years and years, and we sense checked 20 questions, and we wanted each of those questions to have a true, a false, or a don't know option. So that's how the questions had to be formatted. We put that out at the end of 2024, middle of 2024, and then we had 418 responses. And what came back was that there were some questions that people were just aligned on. They made sense and they got right. And there were others which were muddier, that people were either answering I don't know, or they were answering true when we'd established the answer was false, or so on. And here's just some example 6 of each. The other thing that came back from the quiz was feelings. First of all, established for us that this is something the community cares about, so we were in the right place doing research to make this better. People love the quiz, number one. but people struggle to answer some of the questions because of context, that very human need to know, okay, well, I can't answer this abstract question because I need to see where it's going, and how it's resonating and what it means to me. People were also picking on the fact that, you cannot just change words. This isn't a kind of knee-jerk reaction like the interface example I showed earlier. You can't just swap out terms and for other terms that you think are simpler because there's legacy involved. These terms have all been selected for a certain reason and they mean things to lots of people. But one of the things that came through the comments was a kind of light to how we might move forward with this. So this particular comment, there's no question it's complex, but let's accept that it's complex and let's focus our efforts on how we can produce tools or ways for people to actually understand the terminology, get to grips with it and learn it, and understand like how to apply Drupal in the way that they need to. Let's aim towards a really simple guide that can get somebody up to speed with the vocabulary of Drupal. So, concluding this piece of work, this current piece of kind of like current state learning, I guess, the quiz and what we've done so far in Drupalisms has been a real success in terms of innovative thinking, because in 4 particular areas. Firstly, we have a group of interested and engaged contributors, and with groups like that, you can do anything. You can really make a change, so that's a super positive. Also, that ripple effect started to occur, because when we put the quiz out, people started to think, okay, for example, the people that work on documentation, Amber and Joe, got in contact with us and started saying, well, we write the documentation for Drupalize Me, can we sync, can we work out like certain terms we really struggle to explain in documentation, could we maybe prioritize looking at those for how to kind of make them simpler or make them easier to define. And in a similar way, we've got the opportunity to work with the Drupal Open University initiative run by Horrell Drupal Viking, who's looking at how people learn Drupal, how it's taught. And obviously there's an opportunity there to think about the words being used. And with the advent of Drupal CMS, a blank canvas, a new product, we had the opportunity to make really careful choices about which words were being used on the interfaces for those non-technical audiences. I'm going to talk about some discovery learning that's happening in Drupal with the example of Drupal CMS. And this was about, as I said, looking towards non-technical audiences. And the question that kind of was around really was, okay, we know non-technical audiences are out there, we know that they can benefit from using Drupal, but how can we convince them? How do we bring them in? Simple answer, we needed to learn about them. This is the purest form of the learn and build and measure cycle. So first of all, we needed to know how they work, what their tasks are, what their expectations are, and what products they use. Because if we're going to lure them away from other products, then we need to know why they're using those products and what tasks they're using them for, and how we can kind of meet those demands with Drupal and actually do a better job with Drupal, as we know we can. When we had that information, we needed to then focus on the build, and a first impression was super important, because this is where someone will decide, yes, I'm going to use Drupal as my CMS, or no, I'm not going to do that. The onboarding needed to be slick, the tasks needed to be upfront, we needed to have pre-thought what people were going to need with the fundamentals built in. And then when we got to MVP in version 1, of course we were not done. We needed to then gather data from that and work out, okay, how is it being used? How can we prioritize those areas and make them even better? So leading up to version 1, some of the areas of discovery research we did, we looked at archetypes. This is a fancy word for just descriptions of people who we think would use Drupal CMS. And the jobs to be done are the tasks that they would do in a particular context, so in their particular world. And for this, we were really lucky, because over the years there's been lots of research done in the Drupal community about how people use Drupal, what they like, what they don't like. That was a great starting point. We had some extra research from Acquia as well, and we added that with interviews, and we learned a lot, and we got a really rich picture of these archetypes. We then started to look at those tasks and that onboarding piece, and working out that when people learn a system for the first time, there's some tasks they have to do just once and they're done. There's other tasks that they do that kind of warm them up for doing other pieces of work, and then there's some tasks that they'll have to get to grips with to do all the time. And it was like breaking all of those down and thinking, how can we make those as straightforward for people as possible? Benchmarking, I said before, we knew that the people that we were attracting, these non-technical audiences, were using products like these, so it was important to know what they were offering and how we could respond to that. And all of that led us to being able to build from an informed place. So we built a very intuitive installation route. It's a kind of step-by-step process. And this went through multiple iterations to think, what do we put out when? That will let somebody then arrive at a dashboard with the tasks up front. So straight away they could see how to do things that they would need to do with their CMS. And with things like SEO and accessibility built in, they didn't have to think about this. It was just there for them. So, where we are with it now, version 1, launched obviously in January, and since then, from April onwards, we've been able to collect telemetry data using an Acquia trial, and this has been really insightful because it's telling us how many people are using it first of all, but also what they're actually doing within it. And so we're seeing that the creating content, extending, and the managed media are where people are spending their time. So when we're planning our kind of measuring and looking at how we can keep improving, that's a really good indicator of where we want to focus our priorities. All right, how am I doing on time? Okay. I'm going to talk about iterative learning and how this can spark innovation. And of course, I'm going to talk about Drupal AI, and I'm super excited for the AI Summit tomorrow and all the AI talks today. So when we're looking at AI from a UX perspective, we're thinking about how we can do anything with AI, right? But how do we shape it to enhance people's experiences of using Drupal? And here's some more human behavior stuff that can help us with this, because when you're presenting AI as an option for somebody to adopt and use something instead of them doing the task themselves, you're talking about a change in behavior. And as humans, there are 3 factors, 3 conditions that will help us change a behavior from moving from an old way to a new way. First of all, as humans, we need to have a capability. This is called the COM-B model. So we need to feel confident that the new way is going to do what we want. We need to trust that we can use it, and it needs to match our mental model, our way of thinking. We need to also have an opportunity, so we need to see the relevance of this new way in what we want to do. And there's an easy way to adopt it and the choice to do it, and we're empowered to do that. We also need to be motivated, so we need to know what the new way is going to offer us in comparison to the new way. If it's going to save us time and effort, then those are motivating factors. So how this helped us in terms of planning UX around Drupal AI, was thinking, okay, Drupal users are only going to use AI features if they're useful and they're usable in whatever context they're working. So we need to put them in a context where they're working. We need to give them a task. We need to give them a piece of AI that can help them with that task, and we just need to see what they do, naturally, how they actually use it. Since AI is so easy to tweak, this is why it's iterative learning. We can then do a really quick piece of learning from that. And then we can iterate, we can change prompts, we don't have to invest tons of time in code here. We can really get to learn very quickly if it's a yes or a no, and then move on. So I'm going to show a couple of videos to show you how this has actually panned out. So this was one of the earliest pieces of UX research I did on Drupal AI. This is an old style chatbot, and we basically put it into an interface and gave the person a scenario that they were running a book publishing website and they were publishing book reviews, and we told them, okay, you want to add pictures of the covers of the books to your book reviews. How do you go about doing this? So I'm in a room of Drupal people, and all of you are thinking, well, that's easy, that's fields on a content type. But these people were non-technical, and they didn't understand what Drupal terminology was. They wouldn't have known how to ask that, and they wouldn't have known actually how to do that. So when they go to, it's actually cool. So the chatbot comes up, they've got their task, and they're just going to type in, and I realise it's really small, I'll read out what they're typing in. So I'd like to add book cover visuals to each of the book reviews on my site. Can you help with that? And this is the old style Drupal agent is thinking about this, and it provides them with, yes, I can help you. Here's how to do it, here's the instructions to follow, and then it finishes with a message, you want me to do this for you? And the person goes, please proceed, Drupal agent. Very pleasing. And actually, this is a second iteration, because the first iteration, the AI agent just did it for them. People hated that. They didn't want to be told, they didn't want the stuff done for them. They wanted to know what it was doing. So it then actually did it, took them to the fields, and they could check its work. So we saw the potential here, and then we could iterate with AI and think, okay, in the content management space, in the content editing space, which is where kind of dear to my heart at the university, what other potential is there? And then, like, you know, this is actually maybe 6 months on, I guess, and we started to think, okay, well, how, at the university, we have a problem with people applying rules of a style guide that we implement. Okay, we give them a bunch of rules to follow, they forget them. They only edit web pages, like, kind of occasionally, so that's one problem. The other problem is we work for a university and people love words. They write thousands and thousands and thousands of words. They just want to publish them. And when it comes to a website, this is a lot of scrolling on a mobile phone. So AI can help, LLMs can help structure content, put headings in. So we were like, okay, let's experiment here. Can we build something into an interface that would help people? So this is a new iteration of it. You can see it's like the design's changed as well from the flip up, flip down. And the person is typing, okay, so it's coming up with its welcome message, how can I help you with your web content? And the person who's using this says, can you help me with my page layout and give me some ideas? And they have some content there they've just copy-pasted from like a Google Doc. You can see there's lots of words there. What's happening here is it's working, is it's actually reading the content on the page, because in the back end, this is a series of agents. So one of the agents' job is to read the content, and then there's another agent's job to make assessments against the style guide, and another one to give it some suggestions of how that content could be structured. And we've tested this, we're actually still testing this, but people are really surprised that this is actually saving them work and effort, and they can see that that's like something that would be useful to them. There's more work to be done in terms of how they actually take the suggestions and implement them, but then that's where the iteration comes in. Now we need to think, okay, how could we get it to preview and move on? So, but like innovation in action. Okay, stop. Going to share one more. This one's even worse to see, sorry. It's come out really small. We started thinking search is an issue for us at the university as well. People can't find stuff on our web pages, mainly because there's so much content there and it's kind of unstructured because people like so many words. Could we get an AI assistant to help us find content? So what we did here, we built, this is a very simple chatbot again, which just exists here, and all it does is search. It searches the content. This is a demo site that we took from our university web estate, installed this on it, and then we just asked it a bunch of questions and saw how it did. And this question is super small, you may be able to read, but they're asking, this is designed for students who have joined the School of History, Classics and Archaeology. One of the questions students will ask is things like, when's the library open? Where do I get my books? So we asked it, when does the Classics Library open? And it basically gave a computer says no answer, because it didn't find the word library. It searched through the content, through the index. It couldn't actually find the index. So we're looking in the back end and looking at where the answer to that question was. It's actually on a page called Facilities, but it's not called a library. Of course, it's called a Special Collections Reading Room. But of course, a student is not going to know what a Special Collections Reading Room is. That's an academic thing. So we could then do some tweaking in the back end, and we could tell the AI, look, there's certain jargon words that we use at Edinburgh. We need to make this better for students. Can you help with that? So then it became less about a search that could do everything for a person. I'll show it, but you're not going to be able to read it. But then we did some tweaking in the back end, ran it again, and is it working? It is working. It actually then found, it said in the answer, it's a Special Collections Reading Room. So it's taught us various things. It's taught us that AI has potential here, but it's also taught us that we have to look at our content to make the AI work better. And then there's a choice there as to the value of it and whether we invest in it. But that's one of the things that UX can help with, to save putting time and effort into something like this if it's not going to be valuable. All right, on the AI side, there's tons more to do, right? There's lots of iterations and prioritization. One thing that came out today, in fact I think it came out a few weeks ago, was a great survey that 1x Internet ran, where they put lots of different ideas for AI agents out there into the community, and they gathered a kind of vote for what people, what the mood is for people, what people want to see kind of developed. And some of the AI features that came out was a search optimizer, an audit trail agent, accessibility advocate, and a content librarian, and an approval architect. There's more detail about this in the report that Paul Johnson's circulated today, actually, so it's really interesting. I recommend reading it. Another area to look at in AI is, of course, how do you even get people on board with it? Because, yes, it can do lots of things, but if people can't install it, or they don't realise the process that they have to go through, or what needs to be in place before it works, they're never going to get to kind of recognise the benefits. So these are two areas where I'm excited for UX-led innovation. So, I said at the beginning, I'm in this new exciting role as UX core manager, and I keep beating myself up thinking, where's your vision, Emma? Come on! So that's it. I just want more UX-driven innovation in Drupal, but I'm a realist and I know that this is not going to happen overnight. So all I want is more UX to happen, conversations, issues, requests, and I think over time with this we'll get a kind of growing tide in the community, and we can all recognise the benefits of it. I'm a contributor. I've always started as a contributor, so even though I've got leadership roles, which I'm super proud of and feel very responsible for, I'm still very motivated to continue working on issues that have begun already, like the ones that I've shared. So, help me. I'd love to connect. There are a couple of working groups if you're interested in any of those particular pieces of work on Drupalisms, on UX, Drupal CMS, and then AI. Connect with me and ask me some questions if you would like. Thank you. We have time for questions, actually. Does anybody have any questions? Or I'm here all day today and tomorrow. If you don't want to ask your question out loud, you can come and find me if it's easier.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm part of the AI initiative,
yes.
What do you think is the most exciting part of the AI ecosystem that UX can have the most impact? No pressure.
Oh, okay. That's a nice, easy one. Thank you, Kristen. So the question was, which area of the AI ecosystem do I feel most excited by? I think, like for me, I have a bit of bias here because the kind of content editor and the sort of site builder potential, I can see AI helping there, because I feel like this has sometimes felt like something that not everybody can do and not everybody understands, so it can kind of open it up so that not necessarily people can do it by themselves, but they start to learn with the help of AI what's involved, what they need to do a good job on that front. From the back-end side, I feel like the kind of processes, that there are a lot of complex processes in Drupal for good reason. It's, the stuff that we can do, it is complex, and that's why, but I feel like AI has an opportunity to break that down and to maybe take some of the effort away from that, because again, it's a kind of cognitive load thing. So I think, we could get to a point where we're confident to give AI some of the maybe system stuff to free up time elsewhere and to think more creatively. Hi.
So in terms of UX and Drupal CMS, and first of all, this is probably my first time hearing you speak, and very impressed and
Thank you.
Love the work you're doing. One thing that I wonder about is, as a developer, when we approach these issues, like you said, you can see a problem and fix it in the space, and you're not fixing the overall group issue. But some of the issues that need to be addressed sounds like there may be some, fundamental refactoring that needs to happen. I guess, how do you balance the implications of, we would love to rework this thing, but it would require refactoring
Yeah.
how the whole installation page is done. Do you have that in mind, or do you just say, that's not our problem, let's do the UX the way it should be, and then we'll hand it to the tech and see?
Okay, I'm going to paraphrase your question just so that it gets in the mic. So the question was, when we notice the potential to do something differently and refactor it, that's a lot of work and effort, and how do you balance putting the effort into that with UX versus kind of sticking with like the existing way of doing things? I think that hopefully that's kind of phrase your question. I think there are various things. UX is a brilliant tool for prioritization, because if you have a particular, if you want something to happen, if you want a group in the community to start doing something in a different way, or they're not doing it in a way that you want, it's worth doing UX to work out why that is, because it can be a refactoring situation, but it can also be a question of like training and guidance. So it might not necessarily involve doing a kind of refactor of an interface. It might involve looking elsewhere for, like, maybe there's a tool that can help achieve that different way of working, or to help somebody understand something a bit better. So by doing the UX, you can kind of learn about the potential for it. By listening about like how people are doing stuff and why they're not doing stuff in a certain way, there's the potential there. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that, you know, this is not a quick thing, and like big meaty pieces of UX work often start, and then by continually learning you realize, okay, no, what we thought was going to solve this is not going to solve this, we need to bring this in and that in. So that's why it's a good idea to view it as a kind of continuous cycle rather than a kind of directed, we have to, we have an end goal of refactoring something, and then because that can put you in a position where you fix one thing and then you end up with other stuff that you need to fix. If that kind of answers it. It's hard to answer that in the abstract. I can maybe chat with you some examples of where I've seen that happening to, bring some more colour to that than that answer.
I've got one that's almost the same question,
Okay.
I think, but a different angle on it. I was curious how you think about people who are already familiar with the Drupal interface and know how to do things, and then you introduce a new interface.
Yeah.
How do you bring those people along?
I think the question was about how you bring new people in, or how you make sure that you don't mess things up for the people that already know
The latter.
how interfaces are. So I think there's various things, and there's a phrase, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to make huge changes in something to kind of cause problems for other people, but that's why it is worth learning about and doing some research up front before you change whatever because every change comes from a motivation. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to re-change this interface. That's a whole ton of work. There's usually a reason behind it, like why are people doing this thing? Why are people not using this thing? That kind of thing. So it helps to do some research around it, because you could make a tweak and change something that's been winding everybody up in the community forever, or you could be doing the opposite. Why have they changed that? I liked it working. But the only way you'll find out is by hearing from people and by kind of reaching out. So it's worth doing either way. And I think we were lucky with Drupal CMS, because that was kind of, okay, we can start and we can focus on a particular audience, and we can, going through that process, it's not restricting just non-technical users to just using Drupal CMS, but we started to learn how people in general want to build websites, because people do stick to patterns and stuff that they know, but also they also want to kind of learn new stuff as well, and it's trying to kind of mold that into the existing ways of working, which you can only do by research and by hearing from people, and then you can make a call. Okay, it's going to make it better for this group of people, but it's and that's a small group of people, and that group of people is bigger, and is worth more in terms of effort and time. You can then make a call who you prioritize for, but things change as well, trends change, so it's good to keep up with what expectations are and what people are trying to do and not achieving. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. And
No, go for it. There, yes.
Yeah, question.
Hi.
Yeah, going off of that question about looking what people do. I know you did have a survey about like what's where the most frequent visits, such as and all this stuff. My question is, it seems like the research done on there is typically for like non-technical users and stuff, because as mentioned, developers are kind of used to a framework can be pushed in the backend. So my question is, that survey, like where was it done, or like what?
Which survey? Sorry, you're asking me which survey do you mean? Do you mean the one about terminology, the Drupalism? Oh, the community quiz, right? So that survey went out to everybody in the community. It wasn't just aimed at non-technical people. That was just circulated widely. And actually, I don't have the statistics, but we asked people to let us know what their roles were, if they wanted to do that, whether they were back-end developers, front-end developers, and there was a mix. I don't have the exact statistics, but there was a mix. And we'd need to do some more research to work out if there was a correlation between back-end developers getting more questions, getting the correct answer. But one of the things the survey taught us is that there are certain areas of alignment, but there are other areas that maybe could be clear. And we're not talking about swapping out terms for other terms, because that would make the problem worse for people who already understand stuff. But it's about trying to think, how can we make that accessible to other people? Because what tends to happen is people will reach a plateau in Drupal, and after that they don't know how to do more complex stuff. And one of the things that this survey was indicating, that the words that we use don't really help with that. So if we can find it's not about changing the terminology, it's about trying to make it so that everybody can get up to the next level and become more proficient in Drupal. But yeah, for my next talk, which will be at DrupalCon, I'm gonna do a deeper dive into who answered which questions based on the roles. But yeah, so that will be available at the end of October. If you're interested, that will be recorded and available.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's give a big round of applause.